Reginald Barclay starts out as that guy, the awkward, anxiety-ridden engineer who's more comfortable flirting with the holodeck simulations than talking to real people. The Enterprise D crew initially rolls their eyes at his nervous stammering, but Starfleet eventually realizes Barclay is the secret weapon they never knew they needed, at least when it came to making contact with Voyager, who was lost in the Delta Quadrant. In this live stream, we will count down the top 5 episodes where Barclay was simply brilliant. Let's start the show. Hello and welcome to the Savage Stream, the weekly live stream where we talk all things Star Trek. And today we are talking about a pretty controversial character, and that is the character of Reginald Barclay. Now, some people don't care for this character. That would be me. I would fall in that category. But other people love this character. And it's funny because people love or don't love this character for the exact same reasons. When we're first introduced to this character, he's very anxious and bumbling and socially awkward. And on some levels, that's what's hard to take. That's what's hard to watch. And because the other characters don't super love him, it makes us as viewers also feel a little bit of like resistance towards him. However, I have heard from many people who say that they love the fact that he's kind of stammering and bumbling. One person just told me that they love that because he's like a normal person on the Enterprise, right? The Enterprise is the flagship of the Federation. So we've got all these geniuses. We've got Geordi, who's amazing, and Data, who's the only android, and Picard, who's like the best negotiator ever. And what would it look like if there was just like a regular person on the ship? Now, this is before we know that Barclay actually has some chops, right? And so part of that is kind of lovable, that he's this everyday person. He's the guy next door who finds himself on this ship of super elite high performers. And it's a little nerve-wracking. That's totally understandable. And Riker's super cool. You know what I mean? Like everybody kind of has their thing, and Barclay is just trying to figure out his way. I've also heard from people who hate the fact that Barclay is displayed as kind of stammering and insecure because of his anxiety. And I have one friend who told me that they struggle with anxiety, and they've struggled with anxiety their whole life, and they hate this portrayal of it because even though they feel all those big feelings inside, they don't want to come off as somebody who's bumbling or incompetent just because they're socially awkward. And I totally get that. Well, in any case, today we're going to talk about some of the highlights of Barclay. We're going to talk about 5 of his best episodes across Trek and how we were kind of, at least for me, I was kind of surprised by him pulling out this genius card. The first episode is going to be when we first get introduced to him. So maybe he doesn't look like a super genius in this one, but hang in there with me because it does get better. So now let's look at the first episode on the list. Season 3, Episode 21, Hollow Pursuits. Lieutenant Barclay uses the holodeck to escape his social anxieties by creating exaggerated versions of his crewmates. Enjoyment turns to addiction, and he starts missing duty shifts while staying in Fantasyland. Luckily, a ship-wide emergency, along with Geordi's mentorship, pull him back into the real world. He decides to delete most of his programs and start making organic friends IRL. So the thing about this episode that I always remember is the super cringy recreations of holodeck characters that are his coworkers. That's the thing that always burns in my brain. And I feel so violated on their behalf. I mean, first of all, he turns Beverly and Troy into some kind of sex goddesses who are just there to serve his every need. I mean, yes, that makes sense that somebody would use the holodeck that way, right? So that's not outrageous, but I just feel offended on behalf of Troy and Beverly because this is the holodeck we're talking about. You could create any type of woman, any woman in the whole galaxy. Any woman can be programmed into here. You can make a fake woman like Minuet. You could make anything, but you decide to pick your actual coworkers. And that to me is cringy and creepy AF. In addition, he also creates this fantasy where he stands up to Riker and Geordi and Picard. And for some reason, he throws Data in there. However, I feel like Data was never really against him because it's Data, but whatever. He throws Wesley in there, and he's aware that everyone's calling him Mr. Broccoli. He's aware that people on the crew are dismissive towards him or not very friendly towards him. And so he's very, in a very passive aggressive way, he's taking that out on them in the holodeck, right? So he's making Riker like a more diminutive person with a high squeaky voice that he can knock around anytime he wants. He's making Geordi look like a fool instead of Geordi looking like a genius. So for some reason, he does not lock the door when he's in the holodeck. And of course, the crew walks in and finds all this out. they're not too happy about it. Riker's pissed. Geordi's pissed. Troy at first is like, well, he's just, investigating his inner thoughts or whatever. And then she sees a version of her as the goddess of empathy. And then she's like, what the F? And now she's pissed also. So basically, Barclay has to come to terms with his fantasy life and reality, because fantasy is so much better than reality that he starts spending more and more of his time there, including time when he really needs to be at work. Anyways, that's what I remember most from this super cringy episode. However, there was actually a B plot going on. Did you remember this? I did not remember this until I was preparing for this very conversation. The B plot was they were going to some planet because of some pandemic, because there's always something like that going on in seasons, 1, 2, 3 of the show. There's always some kind of virus epidemic or something that they're going to cure. So anyways, they've got these biological samples that they're taking for some reason, and one of them breaks and it ends up contaminating the ship's systems. So somehow this biological sample has something to do with the technological parts of the ship, and the ship starts malfunctioning. All these systems start going down. It's not a problem. It's not a major problem until the warp core gets stuck in the on position and they start flying through space faster and faster and faster. And if they can't fix this, they are all going to turn into salamanders, and nobody wants that, right? So while they're trying to solve this, Geordi's like, where is Barclay? And again, he's back in the holodeck. And he's like, dude, we need your help. And Barclay's the one who figures it out. And he says, okay, every time there's been a malfunction, there's this one crew member there. And I think it's because they were around something, there's something about them that is contaminating other systems. And so Sherlock Holmes his way to discovering that container was broken and then transferred and something. And he really saves the day. They are able to fix the injectors, and they're able to stop the warp core from warp coring. And then they take the ship to the nearest space station, and then they get a full decontam going on. So yay. This is our introduction of this character. And I feel like this was a do-over for the character of Sonia Gomez, who spilled the hot chocolate on Captain Picard. It seems like they wanted to introduce a character who was not polished and perfect in every way. But for whatever reasons, that character didn't work out, which is kind of a bummer because I think she would have been amazing. But whatever. For whatever reasons, that character didn't work out. So this is their second try at that. And as we see, it was a great success because we continue to see Barclay throughout Trek, not just isolated in this one show, which you can't say for all of the characters. Or I guess you can, thanks to Picard. You can say it for all the characters. But, we have a couple that keep recurring in other shows. Yes. So anyways, we have to talk about this episode because this is when we first see Barclay. This is when we see him at his most pure form before he kind of starts to evolve. Now, thankfully, it does get better than this. He is always kind of neurotic and he's always a little bit bumbling, but he also ends up doing just really incredible work. And if you have not seen Discovery, I feel like Tilly is the next iteration, like the next Pokemon form of Barclay. She's very similar to this. She's very, very smart, but also very stammering and kind of, I wouldn't call her bumbling, but she is very like stammering and kind of anxious and nervous. And I would also say, oh gosh, what's the child's name on that show? Indira, I think. Adira. They are also, like Tilly Jr., very smart, genius, always saving the day, but also very anxious and very, very lacking in a lot of confidence. So clearly this was a theme that Star Trek wanted to continue, I guess, to speak to the regular person inside of all of us who does not always feel like a total superstar in every way. So in that sense, they did a great job. Okay, I'm going to check the comments and then we're going to head to the next episode on the list. By the way, there are timestamps below. So if you want to jump ahead to the next episode at any time, feel free to do so. Hello, everybody who is live. Hello, everyone who's watching on the replay. Yeah, not the goddess of empathy. Exactly. Like I would be so upset. And then Wingrace says, broccoli. I guess broccoli's a little tasty if you put some cheese on it. PS2 Chipper says, I guess you can say Barclay is the best of the B-listers. How many B-listers are there? Like, who do we consider main cast or like main crew, and who do we consider like B-list crew? Would O'Brien be like a B-lister? would Nurse Agawa be a B-lister? I'm not really sure because, we've got the people who have actual storylines about them, right? The bridge crew. But then there are also a lot of recurring characters that we see a lot. But then there's also people like Ensign Rowe or like Barclay, who they're clearly, to me, they feel like main characters. Like they're bringing that main character energy. They have episodes all about them, but they're only in a handful of episodes. You don't see them all the time. So I don't know. I guess that's what makes this show really fun. Nadia says, I like Barclay. He has such a great way of looking at things outside of the box. Also, he has so many neuroses that everyone has to find something about themselves in him, right? You're like, there's got to be something. If I'm feeling something's wrong on the inside, I can relate to Barclay in some kind of way because he thinks something's going on with him at all times. Yes, when they go into the holodeck program and Troy sees her simulacrum, and she says, I am the goddess of empathy. Cast aside your, she's just like, muzzle it. And Riker and Geordi are in the back like, I thought you said this was a natural expression of his desires or whatever. Danica says, the fact that he made Riker shorter, LOL. And you know what, Danica, in the beginning of this episode, he like is in 10 forward, having a drink. And then Troy comes in and she's like, wow, you're so big and strong or whatever. And you're kind of like, oh, this is unusual for Troy, but okay. And then Riker says something to him. And then all of a sudden he twists Riker's arm behind his back and he like slams him against the bar stool. And he's like, let me teach you something. And then he like knocks him out. And Troy's like, my hero. And it's at that point where you go, okay, something's going on with this episode. Like I remember the first time I watched this episode. And I remember that experience of being like, all right, like we've clearly entered dream mode when this random guy I've never seen before is just knocking Riker around like it's nothing. And Troy is celebrating that is pretty silly. And in fact, later on in the episode, because when he's found out, everybody's like, all right, you have mandated therapy at this point. Like you have to get therapy because you are spending way more time in the holodeck than you are spending out of the holodeck. And other people need to use this holodeck, bruh. So he's like, okay, I will go to therapy. And then there's another scene where he's in Counselor Troy's office. He's getting therapy. But then all of a sudden she goes over and starts rubbing on his leg and making out with him. And you realize this is also a holodeck program. So the man has been ordered to get therapy. So he gets holodeck therapy from the goddess of empathy. Goodness gracious, dude. Wingray says, I consider Mott to be an A-lister for sure. Mott the barber. You know what's funny about Mott? Mott is like, okay, how many episodes do we actually see Mott in? I feel like we see him in maybe 2, maybe 3, but like he's such a memorable character. Best of Trek, worst of Trek says Dwight Schultz is the best non-main cast actor in Trek. He is a good side dude, which is funny too, because he's got these moments where he's super charming and then you're like, wow, and then he's got moments where he's not or he's just normal Barclay and you're like, wow. So that man has some serious chops when it comes to his range. Like when he is Barclay being anxious and bumbling, I buy it 100%. Nadia says Troy wasn't celebrating that. She was salivating over that. Wait, salivating over what? What did I miss? Actually, don't tell me. Okay, let's go to the next episode on the list. Season 4, Episode 19, The Nth Degree. After encountering an alien probe, Barclay gains superintelligence and takes control of the Enterprise to carry out a mysterious mission. His genius leads the ship to an advanced alien species that does first contact by bringing aliens to them instead of the other way around. After Barclay returns to normal, he gains new insights and a new sense of confidence. Well, briefly. This episode is really good. I truly enjoy this because it's interesting. It's a little bit mysterious. And Barclay is a genius in this episode, but not of his own natural abilities. However, I still count it because he was absolutely a genius in this. So in the beginning, the ship goes to the Argus array to try to fix it. And for some reason, it's failing and the systems keep shutting down and they can't figure it out. And then they come across some random probe. And the probe starts chasing them, okay? And they're like trying to destroy the probe and blow up the probe and outrun the probe, and they can't get away from the probe, and they don't know what to do. Eventually, the probe starts attacking the shuttle, and the shuttle starts breaking down, and then it attacks Barclay, and then Barclay collapses, and then I think they're finally able to destroy it, or it goes inert or something. When Barclay wakes up, he's like, I think I feel fine, but I feel like a little bit different. And then as the episode starts going, he starts getting smarter and smarter and smarter. He starts solving all these problems. He's like, I can fix the Argus array in 2 days. They're like, what are you talking about? We've been here for months. This thing is like unfixable. We need to just blow it up and start over. And he's like, no, I got you. But he starts to get frustrated. We even saw that little clip where he's talking to Einstein and he's correcting him on all his theories. So he starts to get frustrated with how dumb regular people are because he's getting so super smart. And he's trying to use the ship's computers to fix this array. And it's the more he tries, the more it fails. So he's like, you know what? I've got the solution. I'm just going to connect my brain to the ship so I can integrate more fully with it. And then I'll be able to solve this problem and fix the array, which he does. So that's where we get the scene where he's in the holodeck and he's got the light beams shooting at his brain or whatever. And he's not talking. He's just kind of twitching his head side to side. So at that point, the entire ship becomes an extension of his body because his brain is integrated into the system. And when they try to shut the computer down to try to like loosen the grip or something, he doesn't let them. He does not allow it. He locks them all out. So now they're at the mercy of Barclay and whatever the F he's doing. He was right, however, when he integrated his mind with the ship, he was able to fix the array, no problems. But then he kept going. They were like, yay, you fixed it. Okay, you can give us the ship back now. You can give us the ship back any minute. And Barclay's just like, this is mine. He takes them through some subspace conduit or whatever. And they travel a really far distance really quickly, way faster than warp, way faster than what they could possibly do without this assistance. And they end up in the center of the Milky Way galaxy, where they discover these aliens called Synthurians or something. Hold on, let me see. I have this. Yeah, Synthurians. They're basically giant floating heads. Okay, there's something for everyone. And they are able to disconnect Barclay's brain from the computer because he wasn't even able to do it himself. So they disconnect him. Barclay shows up on the bridge and then he explains everything because now he like has the knowledge or whatever. And so he tells them what happened. And the big giant head also tells them what's happening. And while Barclay is back to normal as Barclay can ever be, he still remembers how awesome he felt being super smart. So like he still has all those memories. It's not like they wiped his mind or anything. And we find out that the Synthurians, this is exactly how they explore the galaxy. Instead of them traveling all over the place the way the Federation does, they send out probes. The probes reprogram technology to bring people, aliens, whatever, to them. And then they talk and they exchange information and knowledge, and then they send the people back. So they were the ones who sent that probe, and it was trying to reprogram the Argus array, but it was incompatible. Then it tried to reprogram the shuttle, and that was incompatible. And then it tried to reprogram Barclay, and that was totally compatible. And through him, he was able to reprogram the ship and bring them to the center of the Milky Way galaxy. So in the end, he is... he's back to normal, but he remembers feeling really confident. And in his really confident moments, he did ask Troy out on a date. And she was like, yes, because he was so smooth. But now that he's back to normal, he's like, yeah, we can just forget all of that. And she's like, no, you owe me a date in the Arboretum or something like that. And he's like, oh my. And it's pretty cute. It's like, it's how it ends in like the silly 90s sitcom-y style. I wonder how that date went, though, because I feel like it probably wasn't awesome. And I also think, though I might have this wrong, I think this was the episode where Geordi was dating the girl with the Coco No-Nos and the date was not going well. But then, oh no, that wasn't this. That was John Doe because he like touched him and gave him confidence. And then, okay, so no, I'm getting that wrong. So this is Barclay. He's the only one who got confidence. No one else got confidence in this episode but him. And I wonder how that date went with the less confident version of Barclay. I feel like it was probably super awkward. I mean, dating your therapist feels like it's crossing a line, but it's the future. So maybe they don't have those kinds of lines. Okay, I'm going to check the chat to hear your thoughts, and then we're going to go to the next episode on the list. Okay, so when Nadia said Troy wasn't celebrating that, she was salivating that, she was talking about when Barclay hit Riker in that scene in 10 Forward, which was so, it just was so silly. I mean, it was fun to watch, but you're just like, come on, dude. Like, yeah. If you're going to get in a fight with somebody, don't pick Riker. Don't pick Riker. Don't pick Data. Don't pick Worf. Pick Wesley or something like that. Don't pick these people who look like they could take a lot of people in a fight. That'd be my recommendation. Yeah, so Eric says, to be fair, if there was a holodeck, most of us would spend way too much time pretending to be on the Enterprise. Yes, that's all we would be pretending to do, right, Eric? Um, yeah, honestly, like, I mean, our version of the holodeck is video games, TV, movies, books, media, so social media, TikTok. So, like, yeah, we would spend too much time there. Absolutely. But we also have to be at work. And I think that's where it all went wrong because people can still kind of like be on social media or whatever at work conspicuously on their phones. But the holodeck, you have to like physically move your body into the holodeck to experience it. And that's why Barclay got tripped up because he should have been in engineering. People were looking for him, and he's over here with the goddess of empathy in the holodeck. And that's what got him. If only he had used his data pad instead. Hooray! Wingray says, "Hooray! A good version of Nagilum." Yeah, see, that's a deep cut. Nagilum, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's like the creature from not Where Silence Has Lease, Where No One Has Gone Before or something, or maybe it was Where Silence Has Lease, where the Enterprise was trapped somewhere and some newt-looking creature trapped them because it was mean. I don't know, it was dumb. PS2 Chipper says Barclay became the lawnmower man. What? What are you talking about? Um, okay, so here's why I don't know what you mean. Wasn't that like a scary movie from the 90s? Was that the movie with the guy with all the nails in his face? Or was that a space movie? I get those confused. Or was that a video game? I don't know. Nadia says Barclay connects to the computer and becomes the future of Chat GPT. Oh my goodness, that's pretty funny. Nadia says the flying head alien thing reminds me of the aliens in My Stepmother is an Alien. Oh my gosh, you're totally right. You're totally right. Except for wasn't that like a eel, right? It was like this just like a long tube thing and it just like had one big eye and the eye just like looked around everywhere. I might be confusing that with another movie as well, but I think that was just like a I want to say a neck, but it was just like an eel with a big eye at the end and it was in her purse, right? Yeah, that movie was fun. PS2 Chipper says, I have vague memories I should rewatch. I remember it being really funny. Danica says, the cliffhanger of Barclay predicting checkmate with the chess game as he walks out of 10 forward. Oh, yeah. I forgot about that, Danica, where he still has like a little bit of the smarts in there for like if there was like a residue that was left on Barclay. Nadia says the big alien head thingy is the progenitor of the caretaker. They use the same strategy, pulling people from other parts of the galaxy to them. That's interesting. Or the caretaker was the progenitor of the Cytherians. They evolved because they actually sent people back to where they're from, unlike the caretaker. I know, huh? The caretaker was just such a jerk. I mean, so the caretaker is the creature, the life form in Voyager that stranded Voyager and Equinox and Ferengi and all kinds of ships in the Delta Quadrant because it was looking for a mate to take over its job for it. And the reason why I say it was such a jerk is one, that's not cool, but two, it destroyed this planet, the Ocampus planet. And so it made this little bubble like in the center of the planet to provide for the inhabitants so they could have like food and shelter and energy and technology and all these things, medicine. But from my understanding of the pilot episode, the Kazon also lived on that planet. So what the caretaker did was he took all the Ocampans and he put them in this little protective bubble, and then he took all the Kazon and put them outside on the desert surface area where the biome has been completely destroyed, where they have to kill each other for water. What? I'm gonna have a whole video about pilots next week. At least that's the goal. PS2 Chipper says, could you imagine being stuck on Excelsior class in the TNG era with no holodecks? You know what? I think it would have been okay to be on the Enterprise D if it didn't have holodecks. I think that'd be fine. I think what would not be fine is to be stuck on Voyager without holodecks because they've got a 70-year journey home, which was shorter than that, but still. And they've got no access, as Janeway said, to culture, to the latest music or books or anything else. And they have to start at some point designing their own sources of entertainment. Can you imagine being trapped on that journey without a holodeck? I mean, cabin fever is real. I don't know if they would have made it. PS2 Chipper says, Lawnmower Man is where they hook up a slow person to a computer and he becomes smart. Was it a scary movie? Because like, I I'm not into scary movies, but something about the name Lawnmower Man sounds like something scary that I wouldn't watch from like the 90s. So let me know because I have no idea. Um, Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says not necessarily. The Constitution class OG Enterprise had the Recreation deck, which was a less evolved holodeck. Also, if you look at the Equinox episodes in Voyager, they had this what do they call those little things that you stick on your neck? Those neural whatever. They had those little things, the little devices that they could stick on their neck. And then it was like they called it a poor man's holodeck, where they would click it and it would like change. It was basically like an Oculus, but instead of around your eyeballs, it went on your neck. And then you could like see a program. However, you couldn't interact with the program the way you could with the holodeck. So you could just kind of like see it, and that was it. But you couldn't like pick up things or, go on fun dates with other people. Okay. Nadia says, my stepmother is an alien. You are talking about the eye in the bag. I am talking about the council of bosses that talk to Kim Basinger via the hologram from far away. Oh, okay. So I have not seen this movie in 20 years. And I forgot that was a thing that they did. Okay. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, the way I understand it, the Kazon didn't come to Ocampa until recently. It was only a generation ago when they rebelled against the Trabe and went into space on their own. I don't know Best of Trek, Worst of Trek. We might have to dig into that because later on we find out that the Kazon were like enslaved. And then when they got freedom, they rebelled. And that's when they all got power and started conquering other people. And then they had the factions and everything else. So there's probably some more history I'm missing there for it to make sense. But like, Kazon are the worst. I don't know if I have the patience in my heart to actually dig into that to find the answer, but I do want to know. Okay, Wingray says, I think you're thinking of Hellraiser for the guy with the nails in his face. That is what I'm thinking of. So let me know. Is Lawnmower Man scary? Because I don't know. It sounds scary. That's funny. So let's go to the next episode on the list. Season 6, Episode 2, Realm of Fear. While investigating a missing science vessel, Barclay is forced to face his deep fear of the transporter. While inside the beam, he begins seeing strange worm-like creatures that try to bite him. At first, he thinks he's hallucinating because he's suffering from transporter psychosis. But it turns out that the worms were actually missing crew members trapped in a state of molecular flux. Paranoia for the win! This episode is actually good. I mean, it's hard to watch though, because you get to see Barclay just freaking out the whole time. Such a masterful performance though, because it made me feel anxious watching him be anxious. But this episode is so good. So basically, the crew of the USS Yosemite have gone missing. There was some kind of transporter accident and now they're gone. So the Enterprise is sent to investigate, ? I don't know, to figure out what happened to solve this mystery. But there's some kind of interference because of something I don't recall. I don't know, ions probably. But there's some kind of interference where transporting is really difficult and it has to be super slow for them to get to this ship and figure out what happened. So they're all beaming down, like Beverly beams over, Geordi's going to beam over, it's fine. But Barclay goes to beam over and he just loses his crap on the transporter pad. He's just like, I can't do this. And he rushes off. And Geordi and O'Brien look at each other and they're like, what is going on? So next thing you know, we see Barclay back with Troy, the real Troy, not the goddess of empathy, the real Troy. And she teaches him this tapping technique to tap underneath his ear whenever he's feeling anxious to like calm his nervous system down and to relax. And so the whole thing is, can he face his fears? Because they need him over there as an engineer. And for some reason, they can't take a shuttle. Don't remember what that reason is, but for some reason, he can't take a shuttle. It has to be, they have to beam over. So he tackles his fear, actually, and beams over. Everything's cool. They're kind of investigating. They're not really sure what happened. They do see that there was an explosion of some sort and whatever. On his way back, that's when he sees the giant silkworm in the transporter room, in the transporter beam. And that's when it attacks him and bites his arm. And so he comes out and he's like, oh my gosh, and he's like, O'Brien, did you see that? Did you notice anything? And he's like, no, there was nothing weird in the pattern. He talks to Beverly and Jordy, and they were like, did you see anything? Worf, did you see anything when you transferred? And they were like, what do you mean? Everybody's like, you're crazy, dude. There is nothing in a transporter beam. There's nothing to see. There was nothing in there. It's all in your head. So there's this scene where Barclay is just kind of talking to himself, walking back and forth in his quarters, and he's rubbing the part of his arm, and he's like, okay, what's going on? Am I crazy? Am I not crazy? And you just see him like kind of unraveling, which is not unusual for Barclay because he's also a hypochondriac, but like he totally had reason this time. And of course he's like, oh man, I knew I shouldn't have gotten the transporter beam. Like I shouldn't have done it. It kind of reminds me of if you've ever seen Magic School Bus, there's this little kid who every single time they go on an adventure, he's always like, I knew I should have stayed home today, because he knows something crazy is going to happen. That was Barclay's moment. He was just like, oh, I knew I should have stayed on the ship today. But he goes through the logs he Googles what his symptoms are. And of course, it comes back horrific, as it always does. And he's like, that's it. I've got transporter psychosis. That's what happened. And they're like, first of all, eventually he admits this to Beverly, I think. And she's like, or maybe it was Troy, but I think it was Beverly. And she's like, do you know how rare that is? It's like a 1 in a million thing. And it's not going to happen from one time using the transporter. That's not what's going on. But before he gets help, he self-diagnoses. And so he starts to self-treat as well. So he's drinking water and taking his heartbeat and checking his eyesight and, pinching himself. And, he's just making sure he's okay. And he's like, oh, one of the signs is dehydration. So he's drinking water like crazy. Another one of the signs, he's just freaking out. But in the midst of all of this, he actually gets, Troy says that he is unfit for duty because he's going so far off the deep end, and he does something. I think he like tries to transport by himself, or I forget what happens, but he ends up like passing out. He wakes up in sick bay, and everybody's like, what is going on? And that's when he tells them the whole thing. And that's when Troy's like, yep, we're good. You're done. You're not going on any more missions right now. You need to like recover and figure out whatever's going on in your brain. So he's like, okay, fine. But then he's thinking about it, and he's like, it's not fine. I'm not crazy, and I want to get to the bottom of this. So he goes to the transporter room, and he orders O'Brien to transport him over to the Yosemite and back so that he can like see the worms and the transporter beam or whatever. And O'Brien's like, because he doesn't know he's been relieved of duty, but he's like, sir, you sure you should be beaming over? It's like 1 a.m. Like, are you sure that there's something you need to be diagnosing right now? And Barclay's like, yes, I need to look over some systems and you have to send me. And he goes, okay, wouldn't that be easier to do with like equipment? You have 0 tools with you. His story is so flimsy. And then he ends up just being like, I order you to do it. And O'Brien's like, all right, like you're a lieutenant, I'm an ensign or whatever the heck. I don't actually know what their ranks are. But he's like, all right, sir, I'll send you. So he goes and he comes back. And he actually does find these worms. He finds the worm again, but then he finds multiple worms. And that's when he's like, aha, this is the crew in worm form. The number of worms gave him that little like clue. And so he grabs one, he pulls it out. The security team comes, they pull all the other worms out who end up being crewmen who were transformed into worms and then trapped in the buffer. Not sure how that science is right there, but he absolutely did save the day. And this case, it was not necessarily him saving it because he was brilliant or because he was a genius, but it was because he faced his fear and then he used logic in a really illogical situation to save these people who would have eventually disintegrated in the transporter beam. They could have lasted for a while depending on how the systems were set up, because we saw that Scotty lasted for 75 years on his on the Janolan, on his crash ship, but he had set the transporter in such a way that the pattern would keep going. And he had set it for 2 people, and the other person, the pattern degraded too much and they couldn't recover him. So eventually these people would not have been recoverable. Perhaps right after the investigation, something would have been done with the Yosemite. Maybe it would have been destroyed or towed or who knows what, but they weren't going to last forever. So he really did save the day using something that only Barclay could use, hypochondria. Okay, I'm going to check the chat, and then we're going to go to the next episode on the list. Doop, 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 doop. William says, I love that one, especially when O'Brien introduced him to his spider. So O'Brien has this pet spider, and at the very end, they're in 10 forward and they're having drinks, O'Brien and Barclay, And O'Brien's just like, man, I'm so proud of you for facing your fears. And he's like, yeah, dude, thanks. And he's like, I faced my fear too. I used to be afraid of spiders. And that's when I got a spider as a pet so I could overcome that fear. And here she is. And it was this giant tarantula. Ugh. For some reason, he brought it to 10 forward and then he like left it on Barclay's hand or something. Or maybe it was on the table and just crawled over to his hand. And then he's like, I'm going to go get another drink. Will you keep an eye on her for me? And Barclay's like, so it's like, yes, he got over his fear of transporters, but now he has a brand new fear of tarantulas, which you think would not be as big of a fear as it is in space, right? Because you would think there wouldn't be a lot of tarantulas in space, but you would be wrong because there's at least one. Ugh. It just like gives me the creeps thinking about it. Nadia asked, do we ever see the spider in DS9? So that would be a question for Best of Trek, Worst of Trek, because he has seen and categorized every episode of Trek ever. So he says, we never see the spider. We never see the spider again. What a bummer. Maybe the spider, how long do tarantulas live? Maybe it didn't make it. Maybe it just like passed away of natural causes. PS2 Chipper says that was one of the standout episodes for Barclay. Yeah, this was definitely Barclay at his best. Nadia says Barclay used the future version of WebMD to diagnose himself with transporter psychosis. And it was a terrible decision, just like it is today in modern day. It's a terrible decision because it always ends up giving you some answers you wish you didn't have. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says if this script had featured anyone but Barclay, it would be one of TNG's least interesting stories. You're probably right about that. There's something special, not only about this character, but about the way this character was played, that to me is so extremely believable. You know, whenever I see actors emote like really big emotions, especially anger, I find that's kind of what separates the great actors from the mediocre actors. And keep in mind, I'm not an actor, so who am I to say? But I do watch a lot of stuff, right? So it's when they're like really angry and when they're yelling and when they're mad, you can tell when it's totally fake. And you can tell when like they're calling on real emotions that they have experienced at some point. And that to me is like the breaking point. We don't see Barclay being super angry or anything. However, the emotions he does show, the anxiety, the nerves, the stammering, is so believable. He does it so well. And so I think you're right. If it was anybody else, this episode would be pretty forgettable. But also it's the way he plays this role where you believe it. You believe the nerves and the anxiety. And you're also like, yeah, I'd be nervous too. I'd be anxious too. Like there's just something about it that's really, really well done. Robert says, now we know why Barclay transformed into a spider in the later episode. I actually was thinking the same thing when, who just said spider earlier? Who was that? When William said spider, I just thought the same thing, like, oh, how crazy that he turns into a spider of all things. Wingray says 8-episode prestige series of Star Trek Tarantula. Ugh, Star Trek Tarantula. That's a show I would not watch. Of all the Treks that I do watch, I would not watch that one. PS2 Chipper says, I think there's been more time between the air date of TNG and today versus TOS air date and TNG air date. I feel old. Yeah, the 30th anniversary of Voyager was just like last month, which doesn't seem like that math doesn't seem to be working, but I guess so. Robert says he'll always be howling mad Murdoch to me. You know what's so funny? Like, how are these even the same person? Like, he's played these characters so well that when you look at Murdoch from the A-Team and you look at Barclay, I did not even, as a kid, even though I watched the A-Team and I watched Star Trek, I did not connect that was the same actor at all. Because how they're so different. Like, they're so completely different. Anyways, let's go to the next episode on the list. Season 6, Episode 10, Pathfinder. Barclay becomes obsessed with finding a way to contact Voyager and defies orders to prove his experimental method can work. With encouragement from Counselor Troy, he hijacks a holodeck simulation to run a risky plan that ultimately establishes a brief two-way communication with Voyager. His success leads Starfleet to create a way for the crew to have regular contact with home. This episode's also pretty good. I mean, it's not like the best Voyager episode ever, and it's not even really too much about Voyager. It's really more about Barclay. But I remember watching this episode as well because Voyager is my favorite series, and next to TNG. And I remember watching this and being like, "Oh my gosh, it's Barclay!" Like somebody from TNG showing up in Voyager was just so exciting to me. And of course it'd be Barclay of all people, but I was okay with that. And then we also get Troy showing up a couple times. We get Geordi showing up once. We get Riker, who shows up once, sort of, but it's like Q. So I don't know if you want to count that one. But it's just always exciting. It's just always exciting seeing the TNG characters brought back. And when I saw them in Lower Decks, I was like, like every character that was recurring in Lower Decks was just a joy. Anyways, this episode's pretty good though. In it, we find out, unfortunately, that Barclay is back to his old tricks. He is once again addicted to the holodeck. But at least this time, as far as we know, he's not using it to have sex with his coworkers. What he's using it for is to connect with the Voyager crew, because he is working with Starfleet science to figure out a way to communicate with Voyager. They don't yet have a way to get the Voyager home faster, but they do think that there's a way to create regular communication. And so he's working on this project. And in his attempt to perfect this technology, he's spending a lot of time in the holodeck. He doesn't actually need to know too much about the Voyager crew in order to do his job. I think a little bit of personalization is good because it keeps the focus on like, these are real people that I'm actually helping. But that's probably all he needs to know. Maybe some technical things so he can know who's the best person to do XYZ. But he goes far beyond that. He gets completely obsessed. He's spending every waking moment in this holodeck program, this recreation of Voyager. He's pretending to be a crewman. He's like best friends with Harry. He's playing cards with Balan and Chakotay, who are still dressed like Maquis because he doesn't know that the crews have been integrated, So they're all celebrating him and he's the man. And it's kind of Hollow Pursuits all over again, but with less cringe. And he's spending so much time that actually Counselor Troy talks to him yet again and says, hey, I think you're spending too much time in there. You need to start making friends in the real world, not just friends in the holodeck, okay? Because there are real humans around you that you could actually be talking to. There's no reason why you need to talk to these fake made-up people. And he's like, yeah, I know, but this is just, it's my way to work or whatever. Anyways, Admiral Paris, Tom Paris's dad, comes to the space station for like a tour or something. And Barclay's like, listen, I can talk to your son. I figured it out. I just need a little more time. And Admiral Paris is like, okay, let's see what you got. And his boss is like, didn't I tell you not to say anything before he came in? But it's too late. So Paris backs him. He gets a chance to try something, but it doesn't work well. And he ends up overstepping his bounds with Admiral Paris, and he ends up being removed from the project altogether. So as you can imagine, Barclay does not take too kindly to that. So he breaks in and he gets into the simulation and he starts running the test again because he's like, I think I figured it out. I think I can do this. And as he's running the test, he's barred himself in the holodeck where he's recreated, that's where he has his systems for testing the wormhole technology, because what they're doing is trying to open a micro wormhole in the path of Voyager and send a message through it. So he's like calculating the trajectory of the ship of where they think it should go next based on their last contact with it. And so he's doing that from inside the simulation. So his boss and like a security team or whatever, they're trying to break into the holodeck, and he's like, faster, trying to work on his stuff and get the message sent. And they end up getting in. And then of course, all the holodeck characters are like, security, and they all start fighting back. So the real people are fighting these holographic Voyager crew trying to get to Barclay. And then eventually the boss is just like, look, I'm going to, he does something that's going to overload the warp core, like the holographic warp core, but it will cause a warp core breach, which will destroy the entire program. So he tells Barclay, I will blow this program up unless you release control to me and shut it down. And so then Barclay's like, all right, so he shuts it all down because he doesn't want to lose this program and lose all his friends. But in the meantime, he was able to send a message through. And lucky for everybody else, 7 of 9 was able to catch the message and realize that the Alpha Quadrant was trying to reach out to them. And they were able to make a connection after this. Like when they were like, okay, Barclay's like all walking away all sad. And they're like, wait, something's coming through. And then it was like this grand moment where everyone's there and everyone's pitching in to try to communicate with Voyager. And they spend like less than 90 seconds chit-chatting to each other. They send some information back and forth. And then the message is cut because the wormhole can only stay open for so long. But because it worked once, now they know it can work again and again, which they do a couple of times in season 7, where they have communications back and forth, which uh, but whatever. They get home before that becomes super annoying. They get back to Earth before that whole communication thing gets dumb. But anyways, so Barclay absolutely saved the day in this case, and he absolutely used his brilliance. And once again, something weird about him was actually helpful. So his crazy addiction to the holodeck is what gave him the passion to push through and to make sure this project was successful. Now, at the very end of this episode, this is actually pretty sweet. The crew finds out that Barclay was responsible for all of this, like maybe in their 90-second communication or whatever. And they don't know anything about Barclay except for what's on his like what's in his I was going to say his sheet. What's on his information file in the database or whatever. So they don't know much about him. But they all are celebrating and drinking champagne and toasting to him because he made this possible, and now they're going to be able to communicate regularly with Earth thanks to him. And they're all celebrating Barclay, and they say because of his contributions, we are going to consider him an honorary member of the crew, which is really sweet. He doesn't know that they're doing that, but like that's all he ever wanted, In the holodeck program, he was pretending to be a member of the crew, and in the end, the real crew decided to make him an honorary member, which I don't know, it's just really sweet. Thank you, personnel file. That's what it's called. I've been watching too much crime dramas. Yes, his personnel file. So yeah, which is really sweet. Like he doesn't know that they have done this and they don't know what it would mean to him. But for us as the viewers, I don't know. I just thought that was a very nice little touch. Okay, I'm going to check the chat and then we will talk about the last episode on the list. William says it feels off having Barclay and Voyager. I actually like having Barclay and Voyager. I mean, having Barclay like on Voyager is weird. Like in this episode, when you see it, you're like, wait, huh? But having the character show back up in Voyager series was a total delight for me. Like I said, every time I saw the TNG characters popping back up, I was like, oh my gosh, that's them. Similar to in TNG when we saw TOS characters, except for Bones' appearance was not as spectacular as it could have been. Spock's was pretty dramatic. Scotty's was just a joy, like a total delight. Robert says, I do appreciate the humility of Barclay's boss at the end of that episode when he does decide to help. Yeah, totally. I love that they're all like, hey, this is working. Let's do it. Because yeah, Barclay was disobeying orders and going behind their backs and probably needs to be reprimanded or put something negative on his file, sure. But also his technology is working. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I do appreciate that, especially in Star Trek, where a lot of times the bosses, like the admirals or whatever, seem to be just like against progress. You know what I mean? Like whenever someone has a great idea, they're like, no, we can't do that for reasons. And then you're like, oh my gosh, they're just kind of bureaucrats there to create more red tape, to create obstacles for our main characters. So I agree with you. It's nice. I agree with you, Robert. It's nice to have, to see a boss who's like, yeah, I don't like what you did, but this actually worked. Like, I don't like the way you did it, but this actually worked. And let's finish this project. Let's make it successful. And also you're on probation for the next 6 months. Get it together, Barclay. PS2 Chipper says, maybe this is where they got the inspiration for the holographic security guards in Star Trek Online. Maybe. Or you know a lot more about Star Trek Online than I ever will. So maybe they got it from the Doctor. Like just having a really handy hologram. Maybe they were like, we could use holograms for all kinds of things. PS2 Chipper says they killed Kirk twice in Generations. Did they? They killed him twice? That's weird. Rest in peace. But I'm guessing they brought him back twice. Okay, here is the... Oh, no, he didn't die in the first one. Okay, I'm going to take your words for it. I believe Best of Trek, Worst of Trek is talking about... No. It's talking about Generations in a couple weeks. So we can have that conversation then. Okay, now for the last episode on the list. Season 6, Episode 24, Lifeline. When Voyager establishes communication with Starfleet, the Doctor learns that his creator, Dr. Louis Zimmerman, is dying from a terminal illness. Determined to save him, the Doctor transfers his program to the Alpha Quadrant. But Zimmerman refuses treatment due to his disdain for the Mark I holograms. After numerous failed attempts, the Doctor finally convinces Zimmerman to accept his help, and together they develop a cure, mending their relationship in the process. This episode is good. I like this episode. It's again really I want to say sweet, but it's actually not sweet. It's just like this cantankerous old man who doesn't want to see the doctor, and then in the end they become friends. This is basically Voyager's redo of the episode Brothers from TNG, where Data hijacks the ship to go and visit with his dad, and then Lore comes along, and then they all have like this big family reunion, and they air out their grievances, and then Lore steals Data's emotions chip, classic, and leaves, right? This is basically a redo of that, where we're seeing one character play multiple characters. And in this case, it's the doctor going to see his creator, so kind of like his dad. And he is so excited, you guys. He's so excited to go and meet his creator. And he cannot wait to show him all the things he's become and how he's exceeded his programming, thanks in no small part to Kess, who was really pushing him and saying, you can be more than what you're programmed to be. You can learn, you can grow, you can develop. You've been doing it. Keep going. And so he's so proud to be like, Dad, look at me now. I can sing opera. I even had a girlfriend. He also had an entire holographic family where his youngest child sadly died, which was, man, that episode was really good, but I always cry at the end of it. He's had all of these experiences. He was even a pop star on this one planet where he was such a big celebrity that he was signing fan mail all the time. He had little like holographic things, little holographic versions of his hologram that they were passing around. I mean, he's done a lot. And so he cannot wait to tell Dr. Zimmerman about everything he's been through. And Dr. Zimmerman has no patience for any of it. He's like, this is extraneous. All this stuff doesn't matter. You're supposed to be a doctor, not an opera singer. And he's just like so unimpressed by everything the doctor's done. And the doctor's like, what the heck, dude? Like, why aren't you proud of me? Be proud of me. I'm amazing. I almost cured the phage. You know what I mean? Like, I've cured so many things you've never even heard of. And the reason why Dr. Zimmerman was so antagonistic is because this was his first holographic program that he designed based on himself. And the Mark Ones, this version of the doctor, were so widely hated because of their terrible bedside manner and their like awful personalities that they were all reassigned from being doctors to like working in mines, which is crazy. Like, what is going on in the Federation? I don't know, but they were all reassigned to do that. And so this is a huge failure for him personally as a hologram designer, but also all those holograms that are now working in dirty mines have his face and his personality. And so it's a bigger strike to his ego. So when he sees the doctor, it's just a reminder of all of his failures. And the doctor's like, but that's not me. Like, I'm different. And in the end, this is all Barclay's doing, by the way. Barclay was the one who allowed, who set up the technology for the doctor to be able to transfer. And then when he saw that the doctor and Zimmerman could not get along to save their lives, literally, because Zimmerman was dying and would not let the doctor help save his life, then Barclay did what Barclay does. He called in Counselor Troy. So Counselor Troy came, talked to them separately, tried to get them both on the same page. Neither one was having it. This was the least successful counseling session Troy has ever had, probably next to any session she's ever had with Worf and Alexander. It just was a disaster. Like, it just was not going where it needed to go. So what they ended up doing was Barclay and Troy conspired to damage the doctor's program and to tell Zimmerman that his program was degrading and the doctor was going to die if Zimmerman didn't save him. And in doing that, they were like, by the way, Zimmerman, you are going to die if you don't let the doctor save you. So Zimmerman fixes the doctor's program and, of course, discovers their duplicity, but for good reasons. And then the doctor is able to come up with a treatment which cures Zimmerman like instantly, because he's like, oh yeah, I have a treatment for this because I've treated literally everything in the Delta Quadrant. So I already have a treatment for this. And then Zimmerman's like all good and well, which is wonderful. And then at the end, Zimmerman tells the doctor he is proud of him. And he even mentions like, I need to update your program, because at this point, I think he's on like the Mark V. I think he's on like the 5th iteration of this holodeck program, of this hologram. And so he wants to like upgrade the doctor to be the newest version, the one that's like acceptable to the people or whatever. But then he's like, you know what? You're good just the way you are. So he accepts the doctor for who he is. And he says he's proud of him. And he says he's proud that he's the only Mark I, that is still in use in the way it was originally intended, which is as a doctor. And they take this like hollow image together, which is really cute. And then the credits roll over it. So this is a really good episode. And it's really an episode all about the doctor and Zimmerman, I guess. But it couldn't happen without Barclay. And I love that. I love that Barclay was central in creating this. I love that Troy was central in trying to recover the relationship between the two of them. And I love the fact that they have the doctor at all, because this just shows the amount of things you can do with a different type of cast, right? Like, if you have a holographic doctor that you can beam to whole other places, that opens up so much more possibilities than any other crew could have who does not have a holographic doctor, which I just think is a cool idea. And they played around with it a little bit in season 7. I think this was a really successful use of it. And I think they played around with it a little bit in seasons, like 5 and 6, like after he got the mobile emitter, the doctor was able to go on away missions. But this is one of the few times when they actually beam the doctor really far away, not just like to a nearby planet or ship or something like that. And I think there was so much more potential there that was really untapped, which is kind of unfortunate because we're done with that now. But this is a great episode, and Barclay was totally central, and he did use his smarts to save the day and to literally, though indirectly, save Dr. Zimmerman. Okay, I'm going to check your comments in the chats, and then we will be good to go. Okay, so when I said maybe we'll be talking about Generations in like a week or two, Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says in about 7 weeks, because turns out there's 6 movies that happened before Generations. I didn't know that. So many movies. Nadia says, it's going to be a great series of discussions, although I am not looking forward to the discussion of the first movie because I really dislike it. So Best of Trek, Worst of Trek is doing a weekly discussion every Monday about the 13 Star Trek movies, which I'm guessing does not at all include the remakes with Chris Pine. So that starts next week. If you're watching this in real time, you can head over to Best of Trek, Worst of Trek on YouTube and follow along with that. Let's see. William says, I love this one. I got the doctor in my crew on Star Trek Online and Voyager Starship free for the anniversary. Ooh, hey, congratulations. If I had a starship, I would want a doctor on it. Robert says, I rewatched the director's cut of the first TOS movie and it was way better. They cut a lot out and added updated visual effects. That's interesting. So you're saying the director's cut was better because they cut stuff out. Doesn't the director's cut usually have more stuff in it than, or am I thinking of that wrong? PS2 Chipper says, Dr. Zimmerman was just burned out after working on the Andy Dick at EMH. Oh man, what a disaster. William says, I actually met Robert Picardo. Was he lovely? Because he seems like he'd be lovely. Carlos underneath Pauline's account says that I thought that Dr. Zimmerman just hated holograms. He did not hate holograms. He built holograms for a living. His entire house was like full of holograms. He had this pet iguana. It was a hologram. His assistant was this beautiful young woman who was in love with him, apparently, and she was a hologram. So he surrounded his whole life with holograms. But what he was embarrassed about was the doctor looked exactly like him, and all the other versions of that particular hologram were scrapped, basically. Like, everybody hated them. And so he took that really personally, which is maybe note to self, don't make holograms look exactly like you and behave exactly like you. So that way you can have a little bit of emotional distance from it. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, Troy is absolutely a better counselor in a few episodes of Voyager than in all of TNG. I don't know. She has her moments. We actually don't even see Troy counseling the ship for several seasons. She starts out as just the captain's counselor for the first like 2 or 3 seasons. So it was nice to see her, do more. Even though it wasn't always amazing. Nadia says, it makes sense considering how long it took for TNG to start treating her character seriously and making her competent and giving her an actual uniform, which took quite a while. Windgray says Picardo is coming back for Academy, which means the Doctor is going to be in the new show Academy, I guess also as a hologram, but I guess is like a much older hologram because it's been 30 years since Voyager aired. And at the time of this recording, the Academy probably won't air until next year. So I don't know. I'm happy for that. Like, I like the Doctor, so I'll be happy to see the Doctor again. Okay, yeah. Carlos says, I thought the Doctor hated all holograms. I didn't realize the Mark I was a failure. Yeah, it's pretty sad. PS2 Chipper says, I felt Troy became more experienced by the time of her appearance in Voyager. Yeah, I guess she should, right? Like it's been It's been 7 years, so she should be better at it now in Voyager than she was in TNG. Otherwise, there'd be a problem. DJ MGYX says, I'm rewatching all of the movies now, so you will be in a perfect position to have these discussions every Monday about each movie. So the first movie is going to be discussed this upcoming Monday, and then the second movie the next week, et cetera, et cetera. The first will be the hardest. It's got some long, boring shots, but I guess it only gets better from there. And then Robert says they removed a lot of those long, boring shots in the director's cut. PS2 Chipper says he could play Dr. Zimmerman. Yeah, Dr. Zimmerman is like super, super long dead before we get to Discovery. Because even though the doctor helped treat his condition and save his life in this episode, in Lifeline, he was already a really old man. And Discovery is 1,000 years in the future from this moment. So while we still could have the holographic doctor, we should no longer have the actual doctor. Okay, on that note, we've gone through every episode where I think Barclay was super brilliant. We haven't gone through every Barclay episode, though, because there are other episodes that I really enjoy, like Genesis is one of my favorite, where he's the big giant spider. And he set off that entire episode because it was his infection that led to all of that. But like, he wasn't really a genius in that episode. He didn't help or save the day. He kind of caused all the destruction. But all I have to say is we didn't go over every Barclay episode, but we did go over some of his highlights and some of his best moments on the show. If there was an episode I didn't mention that you love, let me know in the comments below. And be sure to like and subscribe this video. Next week, we are going to be talking about a battle of the pilots. And I don't mean the Starfleet pilots. I mean the Star Trek pilots. So I'm going to be talking about the pilots for the first 5 Trek shows in the Trek universe, starting with TOS and ending with Enterprise. So I did say that. Did you say Best of Trek, Worst of Trek is doing a YouTube? Yes, Best of Trek, Worst of Trek is a YouTuber. Like, that is a YouTube channel. You can type in at Best of Trek, Worst of Trek in YouTube, and then you can see all those conversations I was talking about. Yeah. So anyways, we're going to talk about that next week. Or if you're watching the replay, it's probably already up and you can just hit it next. Thank you so much for joining me live. Thank you so much for joining on the replay. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.